Without further ado, please, it's time to thank everyone, especially the representatives of East African Business Council, represented by Vice Chairman Mr. Dennis Carrera. You're welcome, sir. As well as Mr. Mark Correa from African Economic Research Consortium, representing the Executive Director. You're welcome, Mr. Mark. To make this validation very interactive and very fruitful, we'll be guided by the rules of the House, and I will request that we keep our mics off if we're not presenting to ensure that we have good coverage of the validation. We will request that you send your questions to the chat room to ensure that people that are presenting have adequate time to present, and we will interact with the questions from the chat room. I also wanted to inform you that this meeting will be recorded, and this is for nothing else but other than reporting purposes. We'll request that you switch off your video when you're not speaking, and we request that you contribute to the goal of this validation. Kindly remain within the scope of this validation. We request that you raise your hand to contribute or ask a question so that we keep the order of the validation. We invite you to interact with our social media networks. We tweet us at Eabc Jumia and at Earc Africa, and our Twitter handle is at hashtag COVID-19 EAC, hashtag Eabc, and hashtag AERC. Thank you very much, and without further ado, I request that the opening remarks start now, and we request that Vice Chairman, please, you make your opening remarks. Vice Chairman, Mr. Carrera, please take it on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. I hope everyone can listen to me.
Absolutely.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Absolutely, sir. We can hear you, sir.
Okay. Thank you all for turning up for this validation meeting, and glad to see my old friend Vimal and is around, and the other colleagues. The COVID-19 pandemic, which originated from China in December 2019, has spread globally and negatively impacted the human life, as you all know, enterprise, trade, and global economies. The global economy has been affected immensely due to factory and office closures, travel restrictions, quarantine measures that have seen industrial output decline sharply. Trade has been hampered, employment has been at its worst, and economic growth has gone worse. The pandemic has also disrupted global value chains and negatively affected production in developing countries that rely on imported raw materials and finished goods. As the governments are slowly opening borders with international travel resumption, the recovery has been slow and sluggish. With a significant decline in global economies due to the pandemic, the East African community partner states have not been immune to the crisis fallout. Since the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, the region experienced adverse trade performance. That is, declining imports and exports, and significant disruption in cross-border trade across countries in the first 3 to 4 months of the pandemic. You will all recall the challenges that happened at almost all our borders, Rusumo, between Rwanda and Tanzania, Busia between Kenya and Rwanda, between Kenya and Uganda, Namanga between Tanzania and Kenya. There were major challenges, and it took a bit of time and a bit of energy to get these matters sorted. You will clearly recall that at one point we had over 26 kilometers of trucks lining up at borders with goods stuck, with no harmonized policy on testing of COVID, with no clear method of how to accommodate drivers. It was a nightmare. We all recall what happened. Gladly, though, I think efforts were made, although it took time. So whatever delays were experienced, it was at the cost of business. So business, each time, of course, you have such delays, you experience losses. And I think we need to be clear when we are discussing these things that losses in business means losses of money, and it's very hard to recover some of this lost money. Policymakers, including public and private sectors, donors and international development institutions, research and policy think tanks, have been holding policy reforms and debates to assess the impact of COVID crisis on the region, on regional performance, trade performance, including focusing on critical sectors such as horticulture, tourism, hospitality, agriculture, manufacturing, etc., etc. In view of the above, the East African Business Council, in collaboration with the African Economic Research Consortium, formed a technical working group under the Eabc-Aerc COVID-19 pandemic response in the East African community. Under the project, 3 studies are being validated today. We thank you, the consortium, the technical working group, for the job we have put together, and we hope it will be useful to the region. Under this project, 3 studies are being validated today. We undertake, or rather were undertaken, to analyze the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on agriculture specifically, and food security, manufacturing, as well as tourism and hospitality on the economies. Needless to emphasize that these are some of the areas that were badly hit and will take very long to recover. Talk of areas like tourism and hospitality industry, without which were largely supported by clientele from out there, from Europe, from Asia, from USA. From now, without those countries flowing in here, what we have experienced in some of those sectors is damaging. But slowly, I'm glad that we are seeing a quick recovery, and I think our economies will be resilient to see to have our feet on the ground and see ourselves back in action without a lot of losing a lot more time. So the hospitality sector has been hit, agriculture, manufacturing, food security has been affected. But fortunately, I think in the region we are lucky that other than the pandemic, the one thing that sustained lives was availability of food. Just imagine a situation if we had the pandemic and we were hungry. It would have been double tragedy. The expected outcome from this validation workshop is to receive initial findings and recommendations from the consultants before the final report is produced. The regional private sector players in the industry are called upon to provide comments and insights, share experience, and collectively chart out a recovery plan that will guide the transition to normalcy from the pandemic disruptions. It is our hope, of course, that we are doing this job on behalf of the people of this region. It's on behalf of the East African community. And it is our hope that this study will go to enrich the other studies that are being done at national levels. Of course, we know there's a lot going on at the national levels, but it's always good to have more thinking, think tanks coming together to provide ideas, to provide additional inputs into what we all are looking at as a recovery plan. With those few remarks, I wish to thank our esteemed partners, AERC and BMGF, for heavily investing in this assignment, the consultants for producing this work, and the regional private sector that availed their time to respond to the consultants at the time of the studies and are even present today. The East African Business Council is committed to ensuring and the intra-EAC trade countries to recover steadily in the face of the pandemic. We look forward to the contributions from the industry players here as well as the recommendations from the studies undertaken. And we are optimistic that those will provide clear and concise direction towards the full recovery of the East African community economies. I thank you very much and wish you fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chairman, for those very kind remarks and opening remarks. Indeed, the three sectors are the heart of the EAC economies, and their steady recovery means steady recovery of our entire region. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. Without further ado, please, Mr. Mark Correll, representing the AERC, please give us your opening remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamanzi. Thank you, Chair, for your remarks. Chair Carrera, members, Vimal Shah, dignitaries, all protocols observed. My name is Mark Korir. I am from the African Economic Research Consortium, and I'll just make a few remarks, maybe a minute or two, so that we can have more time to look and to listen to the reports. So we got this pandemic with us slightly over a year ago. That was in March 2020. And immediately after that, we, as the African Economic Research Consortium, were in partnership with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And they asked us, what is it that you can do to look at how we can mitigate the impact of this COVID to the EAC community? As a research organization, a think tank in the region, with sub-Saharan African mandate, we took up the challenge and said, let us see what we can do together so that we can fight the COVID pandemic. So we did this proposal to the BMGF, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the objective is to, look into various sectors of the EAC community: agriculture, hospitality, and the service industry, macroeconomic policies, the whole economy. So we looked at this and said, we need to come up with policy options that EAC member states, the private sector, and all other stakeholders can implement so that we minimize the impact of the COVID in our EAC community member states. So this was the objective, to come up with policy options. So today we will have presentations from 3 consultants on various sectors. And what we would want to hear now is, what are the proposals? What is it that EAC member states can do? What can the private sector do so that this pandemic is mitigated? And also in future, because now the talk is, we do not know how long this will be. There may be other pandemics coming on our way, and therefore it should be kind of a broad-based approach so that it is applicable across the board. So we are saying this pandemic and future pandemics. So we are happy to have the EABC, East African Business Council, doing this. You are a major partner. We also have the EAC Secretariat, a major partner, the Ministries of Health, the East African Healthcare Federation, the private sector, KEPSA, and others. So we are happy that we are partnering together as the non-governmental organizations, private sector, governmental, and even the donor community to come up with the options. So when this happened, we had to sign the project so that we have a steering committee overseeing the work. And we are happy that our own Ambassador Peter Mathuki, has been in the steering committee among other members. We, of course, had technical working groups. One of them is this one on trade, and we have another one on health, on policy, on research, and we are happy that all the deliverables, all the policy options are now coming out. So as we validate, my request is that we have, open discussions. You are thinking, you are industry players, so you know a lot about what's going on, and you can prescribe some of the options that we can adopt so that we help our farmers, we help our consumers, we help our citizens, in the region to fight this pandemic. Maybe just to finish, then let me say something about the Regional Policy Forum. We would like that after this validation, we would like to invite you to a policy forum, the open one, which will now have all other sector reports, which we can now open up and do together and say, these are all the options from all the sectors. Then we kind of validate and say, let us move forward. Our request has been that let us be very practical. Let us make proposals that when our member states get to have them, then they are actionable, so that we don't have these reports lying in the shelves again. Now, we have had this feedback that please, these outputs are good. Can we have them implemented? So we will endeavor to get into the frameworks of the EAC member states, whichever organs are there, so that we can lobby and get to them and interest them and say these are the options which we can take up. So without much ado, I want to thank all of you. Welcome to this workshop. We are happy to have each one of you and your organizations that you represent. Let us have fruitful discussions. Thank you, and thank you again. Welcome. Come on, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Korir. We really thank you for actually putting into context and introducing how this assignment came through, and we really thank you for partnering with us. I will definitely respond to the clerical call of ensuring that we don't shelve these recommendations, but put them into action. And we as EABC, we commit to continuing partnering with you and knocking on every door, as you mentioned, to ensure that what has been recommended is put into action. Before we introduce the consultants, I wish to welcome Mr. Ndeyayo Mungure, the Research and Information Officer at TAHA, the Tanzania Association of Horticulture Associations. I would need to know whether you are around, Mr. Mungure. Mr. Mungure, you'll be stepping in for Ms. Jacqueline Kindi in this validation, so I will recognize your presence. Nonetheless, I hope Mr. Mungure will join. I think for now, let's welcome the consultants, and we will begin.
Geoffrey. Yes. Sorry, quick interruption, Geoffrey.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Can we have an introduction of who is present? I don't know if I missed this earlier.
Oh, with your guidance, thank you, sir. We hadn't yet. I thought we were looking at the chat, but we can have a brief, since we are not actually many, and maybe
quick introduction.
A very quick, quick introduction with no specific order. Please kindly introduce yourself. Maybe beginning with Chairman Vimal Shah. Yeah.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Vimal Shah, Chairman of BITCO Africa, and pleased to be here. I guess we just need to listen to the presentations, am I right? Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Next, please. Next, in the interest of time, because we.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Stephen, presenting the Rwandan Private Sector Federation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. You're welcome, PSF Rwanda.
Good morning.
My name is Bala Said Gafane, representing Darsh Industries Limited. I'm a CEO of Darsh Industries Limited. Thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you, Mr. Gabani.
Good morning. Yes, good morning. My name is Ndewe Mungure. I'm from Taha. I'm pleased to be here with you on behalf of the CEO, Dr. Jacqueline Nkindi.
You're welcome. Welcome, Mungure. Looking forward to your contribution.
Good morning. My name is Duncan Chundu, representing the Seed Trade Association of Kenya. I'm the CEO at Stack. Thank you.
Karibu sana. Next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stella.
Thank you.
Can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Estella. If you can just raise your voice a bit.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
If you could increase further.
How about that?
Okay. Okay, please proceed, Estella.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Estella Ariada. I'm the program coordinator for Markup, which is an EU-funded project that works to improve exports of selected agricultural products to the EU, their trade within the EU. We are based in Arusha. Thank you.
Karibu sana, Estella.
The reception with Stella, though, is so bad. I don't think she will be able to follow when we start. I can't hear. I can hardly hear what she's saying.
Estella, can you hear us at least?
Good morning, members. Let me introduce the AERC team. Please, Theo, introduce yourself. We begin with the Director of Training. Theo, please.
Good morning, everyone. This is Theo Azumao. I'm the Director of Training of AERC that I have joined quite recently. And I'm really pleased and glad to meet you all and wishing you a very successful meeting. Thank you.
Okay, we go to Eva Kiambuthi. Thank you, Theo. Eva, please. Eva, are you there?
Okay, go to the next in the interest of time.
All right, next is Naliaka. Are you there?
Good morning, everyone. This is Naliaka from AERC.
Then, thank you, Naliaka. Then we have Bada. Are you there, Bada? All right. I think those are the members and myself, Mark. So thank you very much. That's the AERC team.
ARC is very Kenyan, eh? Vimal, is that your recruitment?
Have you heard of Azamaho?
Vimal, is that your in-house recruitment?
No.
Eh?
It's not
very
my.
Kenyan, eh?
I don't think it's Kenyan at all. I think it's East African. I think overall we're all part of the same system. But I guess people have responded well. So that's response times and responses from Kenya have been better. That's all.
Okay, let's get started.
With your permission, Chairman, I think the rest can send their names and organizations or companies they're presenting in the chat room so that we can get started, so that we can buy time.
Sure. Let's proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So let's have the presentations of the consultancies, and we'll begin with a presentation of the report on the impact of COVID-19 on the manufacturing sector in the EAC. And this will be done by Mr. Godfrey Walakira. Please, Godfrey, if you can beam the presentation. Thank you very much.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Let me first share the presentation on the screen. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. Please present the presentation.
I'm just beaming it. Yes, good morning, everyone. Hopefully the PowerPoint is being seen. Is it beamed?
Not yet.
Mr. Mr. Godfrey, are you facing a problem? We can beam it on your.
Yeah, I'm facing a problem. You can beam it from your side. Eh?
Okay, thank you. Sylvester, please. Thank you. We can see it. You can just put in presentation mode. Eh?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks.
Over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Geoffrey. And I would begin by thanking the board members of the EABC, the management of the African Research Consortium, then also the funder, Bill Gates and Melinda Foundation, the private sector that is present, and public. As I begin, in case, let me first ask Geoffrey, how many minutes do I have?
Godfrey, each presentation has 15 minutes maximum.
15.
Yes.
Okay. In terms of time, I'll try to jump some of the issues, but I'll focus on what is important. In terms of my presentation, I'll look at it in terms of the overview of COVID-19 effects. Then briefly, I'll look at it in terms of the EAC macroeconomic environment. Then just a slight introduction of the light manufacturing within the EAC. Then we look at the key challenges and effects of COVID on light manufacturing. Then policy measures, then I do a conclusion. In terms of the introduction, the measures, I'll go to the measures introduced by most of the EAC governments to control COVID-19 pandemic, managed to suppress the spread and infections compared to the developed countries. And we note and we observe that the EAC economies during the period of March to around May, even though with challenges, the economies remained resilient. So in terms of the measures implemented to control the spread of COVID-19, we notice from the period of March to up to around like May, the measures turned into trade restrictive, which became non-tariff barriers that affected the smooth flow of goods and services, the industrial productivity and movement of people across the EAC borders. Then also the implemented board measures increased the time to clear goods and the cost of production, thus affecting industrial productivity and market penetration for the manufactured output. As we note, EAC manufacturing current contribution to GDP, that is the total EAC manufacturing, it has averaged at 9.7%, and with a projection of 25% by 2032. And in terms of the COVID, we see the impact in terms of affecting where the raw materials are being sourced, the intermediate and capital goods, that is mainly during the peak of the pandemic, that is in the second quarter of 2020. And also we note that because of the challenges of COVID and the restrictions, we saw new developments that emerged out of this crisis. as some of the manufacturers tried and remodeled their business operations, and they started producing the much needed essential items such as face masks, sanitizers, and personal protective equipment. So in terms of the summary of the EAC macroeconomic environment, as we look at it by the population of EAC by 2019, it was estimated at 190 million people. And the total GDP of the EAC by 2019 was estimated at $207.2 billion US. But in terms of the FDI inflows, when we take the periods of 2000, 2010, and 2019, as per the countries, we see the FDI inflows increasing. For the case of Burundi, increasing from 47 million US dollars from 2000 to 228 million US dollars by 2019. Then for Rwanda, the same, increasing from 55 million US dollars to over 2.6 billion by 2019. Kenya also an increase from 932 million US dollars to 15.7 billion by 2019. Uganda also having the same adjustments from 807 million to 14.3 billion, and Tanzania from $2.8 billion to 21.8 billion by 2019. But in terms of the performance, if we take the quarterly GDP growth rates and look at it in terms of the 4 member states, Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, and Tanzania, we see in the second quarter of 2020 and the third quarter, the economies of Rwanda, Kenya, and Uganda posted negative growth rates with the exception of Tanzania, which was at the one which is shaded green, that is Tanzania, if you look at it in terms of quarter 2 and quarter 3. So in terms of the contribution of industry as a proxy for manufacturing as a percentage of GDP, when we look at it in terms of the 5 EAC member states, South Sudan would have been included, but because of the challenges of availability of data from the World Bank, I was not able to pick the figures of South Sudan. But in terms of the existing countries of the 5, we notice that most of the countries, the industrial value added as a percentage of GDP is above 10% from 2015 to 2019. And we see the numbers, if we take all the 5 EAC member states, we see the numbers falling below 30% as industrial contribution to GDP. We shall look at it more details in terms of the findings. In terms of understanding what light manufacturing is, in terms of the International Labour Organization, broadly defines light manufacturing to refer to industries that use partially processed materials to produce items of relatively high value for end users or intermediates for use by other industries. But in terms of the World Bank understanding of light manufacturing, it defines it in terms of the characteristics of light manufacturing and considers it in terms of size of enterprises, employment, and production scale ability. So in terms of understanding how COVID-19 relates to light manufacturing, when you look at the analytical framework, we see that is slide 10. Yeah, slide 10. We see COVID being imposed. Then after COVID being imposed, so we find restrictive measures. In terms of restrictive measures, we can have it in terms of 4 aspects. We have in terms of what the effect in terms of households, the effect in terms of manufacturing, then the effect in terms of financial institutions, then the effects in terms of markets, which are both domestic, regional, and international. But in terms of the households, because of the restrictions of movements, we see the effect directly on households in terms of affecting their ability to earn, ability to spend, and ability also to supply labor to manufacturing. And when you look at it in terms of the manufacturing side, we see the restrictions adding additional costs to manufacturing, where you find the major inputs in terms of manufacturing, which you take as labor. Because of the restrictions, we find now in terms of utilizing the labor force, manufacturers reduced the labor force. Then in terms of production, in terms of the total output, we see because of the limit in consumer spending, due to the reduction in their earning ability, we see also the output of light manufacturing also being affected due to the limit in consumer spending. Then in terms of also the households, in terms of earnings, because manufacturers now during the peak period, they were not producing optimally, so they were producing below capacity. So we see an aspect of where they reduce in terms of the numbers being employed, and also to manage their costs of production, some of them decreased wages and salaries. And this in the long run, we see it affecting aggregate demand and ability to source raw materials. So when you take it in terms of the financial institutions, because of COVID, we see the effects in terms of like manufacturing, we see it coming in terms of the burdens, in terms of the debt burden. So because the manufacturing are producing below capacity, in terms of their sustainability to pay the loans, we see the effect of debt payment being a distress to manufacturers. And in terms of the regional markets, we see now in terms of regional markets, we have both domestic, regional, and international. The closure of borders affects the sourcing of raw materials domestically. At the same time, also production output, which is being exported, is also constrained. This is just in brief what the analytical framework of COVID-19 in relation to light manufacturing. But in terms of the COVID measures, we observe in terms of the 5 EAC member states, broadly, most of them focused on social distancing, movement restrictions, public health measures, then social and economic measures and lockdowns. So when I go in terms of the summary analysis of the impact of COVID-19 on the selected light manufacturing supply value chains, first, in terms of understanding, I categorize it in 2 main categories, where you find it in terms of sourcing of inputs and adding value. So taking the first case of industries depending on sourcing of raw materials in the domestic market, which are mainly food processing farms, dairy producers, and furniture farms, the challenges which are mainly faced in the supply chain are summarized in this. So in terms of sourcing the inputs locally, we see the movements, the ease to access the inputs domestically becomes a challenge because of restrictions and ability to produce. But when you take it in terms of the processing at manufacturing stage, that is domestic input-oriented industries, the main challenge was produced within the agreed standard operating procedures that allowed firms to maintain a small percentage of workforce, and this curtailed company productivity and also increased the costs of maintaining the standard operating procedures, and this was a bit costly to the companies. And in terms of taking the end result of the market distribution, we see the ability of companies to save trade dependent on the existing aggregate demand. Food and beverage industries, their clients were mainly in lockdown, like hotels, schools, bars, and these affected the ability for some of these industries that were mainly in the food chain to supply, because the biggest consumers, most of them were in lockdown, and even the tourists were not coming in. Then also testing of drivers in the early stages was a nightmare and costly, which reduced the time of delivery of the cost of raw materials to the manufacturers. In terms of sourcing the raw materials from the regional or international markets, We see some of the industries, especially the ones in steel and iron plants, the ones in beverages, that is alcohol drinks and fruit processing, paper industries, textiles. We see them in terms of understanding, in terms of the sourcing, we see mainly three aspects. The first one, it comes in the logistical chain disruption. Due to the restrictions on movements and closure of borders, and also looking at it in terms of the general market, if we recall from the period of February to around May, to around April, in the markets of China and India, where there were strict lockdowns, we see a disruption in the supply chains. So in terms of the processing, we see redundancy in production, which is characterized by the low output. Then also some totally closed and reduction in employment of workforce. Then for exports and selling in the domestic market, because of the closure, we see exports being constrained. And in some months, we saw no exports, especially the ones under informal cross borders, and even limited domestic sales. So in terms of the key challenges, I would begin with the first one, the containment measures. How did they link to the companies? First, in terms of the financial challenges, financial flow challenges, most companies operating within the region would notice are micro, small, and medium enterprises and operate on a cash basis. The strict measures affected the revenue earning ability and ability to maintain stock inventory since demand was suppressed. Then in terms of the employment, the restriction of movements and workers, because could not access the factory premises, for the factories that were non-essential, the operations were limited and some were not operating during that time, like the furniture processors. Therefore, companies had to restructure their employment terms where casual workers were laid off and professional staff had to get salary pay cuts and others go on leave without pay until when the operations normalized starting from August. In terms of the supply, logistics, and operational costs, logistical challenges in terms of access to and cost of raw materials from both the domestic market and international market constrain the productive ability. Reduced imports due to the disruption of the usual supply chains, as well as the transportation challenges within the country, led to an increase in the cost of inputs. Then when we take it in terms of the reduction of sales and market orders, lockdown measures affected the aggregate demand that affected the marketing side and limited purchase orders, thus affecting company turnovers and sales. For the companies that were mainly export-oriented, the implemented restrictions, especially the closure of the borders we noticed in the period of March to April, reduced exports and the ability to secure the international markets. But on a positive note, we see business adapting and innovating to new information, communication, and technology solutions to stay afloat. And here, the most popular adaptation measures we noticed was the use of digital and communication technology as a tool to procure and supply delivery to their respective markets. So in terms of the policy measures to stimulate manufacturing economic recovery, first from the government side, government should consider adopting cross-cutting fiscal stroke monetary policy measures to stimulate productivity and limit company financial distress in terms of insolvency and layoffs. So in terms of the breakdown, what governments, public would do, public agencies, stroke government would do, one, the first one is refinance state-owned development finance institutions to offer affordable working capital, establish special financing schemes in commercial banks at lower interest rates, and government giving loan guarantees to reduce business and financial risks to commercial banks. Then two, comes in terms of extensions and deferrals with no penalty. This is mainly from the tax angle in terms of tax liabilities, and also proposal to reduce the income taxes, especially the ones which are mainly focusing on profit taxes, and these are mainly corporation taxes. Then the other one, as we notice, because of the system of VAT, that is value-added tax, that is being implemented by most of the revenue authorities, we find there is a lot of stock that is outstanding in terms of tax refunds. And in terms of the need for manufacturing companies, the revenue authorities with the Minister of Finance or Secretary of Treasury, they need to fast track the payment of VAT refunds, at least to ease the cash flow transactions or the cash flow for the businesses and manufacturers so that they can remain afloat. Then also extending in terms of the loan repayment obligations, because by then during the peak period, we saw most of the loan obligations, most of them in some of the countries were extended for 1 year. Now here, in terms of, I think the private sector and business, extension for the loan repayment and renegotiating the payment terms would be conducive for the manufacturers to stay afloat based on the period that is conducive to the business sectors. Also, in the other aspect, look at it in terms of the private sector, the role of the private sector in the design of the key interventions to support manufacturing. We noticed most of the interventions and measures that governments were implementing, they were one-sided, they were coming from the public angle. So it is critical and important for the private sector umbrella associations at both regional and national level to play an active role in lobbying and engaging governments to engineer tailored specific interventions that are peculiar to their needs. Then in terms of the employment-related measures, we look at it in terms of the design of specific stimulus that should incentivize manufacturers to continue employing the new fresh graduates, youth, to avoid companies' uncertainties in guaranteeing long-term payment of salaries. And here, governments should provide direct special purpose funds that at favorable terms of payment compared to commercial bank-rated financing. Then also in terms of increasing the cash flows of companies, here it is mainly looking at it in terms of lowering the income payee threshold, in terms of exemptions to stimulate aggregate demand and reduce on the tax burden for both individual workers and manufacturing companies. Then other support measures focus in terms of transparency and improved information asymmetry on identifying the beneficiaries for the economic recovery. Then also promote digitalization and e-commerce usage. So in conclusion, as I conclude, the policy options to stimulate the recovery. One, the first one, EABC in coordination with the national chapters should spearhead the development of a private sector-led EAC recovery rebound strategy that includes the private sector needs and requirements for production efficiency. Then two, to boost production and operational efficiency of manufacturing companies, governments should increase uptake of locally manufactured products in the government projects and program. This is mainly looking at it in terms of the local content requirements. You find some countries have at 30 as the minimum reserve requirement. Others may not have in terms of the threshold, what can be consumed under the local content requirement. Then three, in terms of the with outstanding private areas with government, governments should process letters of credit to local manufacturers indicating the debt obligation and promise of payment. And this can be used as security to secure finance. Then also extension of the tax relief to the end of June 21, and governments should fast track clearance of VAT refunds to increase manufacturers' liquidity and cash flows. Also, the private sector should engage in the negotiations of eliminating the existing non-tariff barriers. Here, especially EABC in coordination with the national chapter should engage at bilateral private to private level to identify and coordinate with their respective governments the elimination mechanism. So finally, in conclusion, manufacturing plays a crucial role in employment creation and transforming the EAC economies from being agroeconomies into industrialized ones. So with the new variants of COVID-19 mutating in the world, the crisis continues and is a fact, with some countries entering into the third wave, while in EAC we notice the second wave has started, others are expecting it to start. And also EAC manufacturing companies must navigate through by implementing risk mitigation strategies to minimize the looming recessions and slowdowns that may result from the second and third wave of COVID-19 pandemic. The manufacturing sector recovery needs continuous government interventions that guarantee inflow of cash flows by reducing the existing financial burdens from financial institutions and tax obligations and improve the access of affordable capital. Thank you for your attention as we wait. Thank you for your attention. I hand over.
Thank you, Mr. Godfrey. Thank you for the presentation. Very good observations that you saw while you carrying out the study. Both the effect on production, sourcing, distribution, layoffs, and the effect on aggregate demand. That's very important and we've taken note of. But also, most importantly, we're looking at, as we recover, the role of the private sector. And probably you will need to elaborate more on that one. What do you propose as a private sector in terms of interventions? I probably should allude to that as from me. And also your policy recommendations, very key, and actually throwing the ball to EABC, and that's very, very important, and we take note. And the policymakers here present, of course, will take note of the deferrals and clearing the outstanding areas. That's very important to ensure that we have recovery. Thank you very much. I call upon the participants to note your questions, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the all the three presentations. You can see them already in the chat, and we'll definitely take care of those. Without further ado, please let's welcome Mr. Daniel Mwoki, who undertook the study on the impact of COVID on tourism and hospitality. Mr. Daniel, if you also have a problem, you can always beam me your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kamanzi. I'll request that you beam the presentation for me.
Sylvester, please make it fast.
While the Kamanzi's team is beaming the presentation, I wish to take this opportunity to thank the Eabc-Aerc, and of course BMGF for according me the opportunity to do this work for them. I also wish to thank the key informant that I was able to interact with for the purpose of collecting data, and wish to thank the audience for your presence to hear the findings of this survey. Without much ado, I wish we proceed. My first, I'm first going to give to show the structure of the study, and briefly, that is, the study is the presentation is given as we are going to have a background, which I'm going to rush through. Then I'll go to briefly introduce the study, and dwell a little bit more on the findings, and then ultimately the recommendations. Next slide. I will not dwell much here, given that the Honorable Vice Chair, Mr. Dennis Carrera, gave a very good introduction and background for what COVID has done. But we also need to mention that tourism has played a very important role in the economies of the world, and it was the most affected when the COVID hit. We know tourism is a human-to-human business, a lot of interactions at personal level, and we know when COVID hit, the first thing we had to do is reduce human interaction. So from this point, we notice that at the global level, from the UNWTO World Tourism Organization statistics, we saw that tourism was supposed to grow by 4% from 2018 to 2019, and that's giving us tourist arrivals of 1.5 billion in 2019. Unfortunately, this growth was not sustained, and we ended up with a drop of 74% on average at the global level, where we only recorded 381 tourist arrivals all over the world. We can go further and try to look at how this started. Key emphasis here is in December. In December, we record unusual pneumonia in Wuhan, China. No, it's okay. Just move to the next slide. In December, we record an unusual pneumonia in Wuhan, China. Just move to the next slide, please. Yes, there. And very quickly, by March, the UNWTO decides this is a pandemic of global status, and by the 23rd March, by 24th of March, next slide, please, we have our first case in East Africa. 6 days later, we are recording 176 confirmed cases, and we can be able to break down them like that. We had two in Burundi, 50 confirmed in Kenya, and 19 unconfirmed. Rwanda recorded 70 confirmed, 16 unconfirmed. Sudan, we didn't get the numbers. For Tanzania, we recorded 19 confirmed, 6 non-confirmed, and for Uganda, we recorded 33 confirmed and 10 non-confirmed. And with that, the EAC met quickly and recommended a raft of measures. And you'll see that the emphasis here was on movement of goods. Movement of goods are given some level of leeway here. Sorry, someone trying to say something? Thank you. So within that particular period, a number of measures were prescribed, and I'll just go straight to the last one, where EAC partners were required to provide additional contingency measures, contingency and emergency funds, to fight the impact. 1 year later, this is where we are. These are statistics by as of March 28th there, and you're looking at 194,000 cases, 496 confirmed, 58,776 active, 132,975 recoveries, and unfortunately, we were able to lose 2,745 of our brothers, sisters, relatives, and friends by that particular time. These figures have already changed, given what has been happening in the month of March to date. And this, by the time we finalize the report, we are going to update that as well. Now we move to the next slide. We want to look at, again, press. We want to look at the month-to-month comparisons of 2019 and 2020. I'll just pick the Africa, the green line. We'll see as of April, the drop between April 2020 and April 2019 was 90% in terms of arrivals. And that goes like that up to December, where you'll see the drop to be 80. This is basically because of some changes that happened between July and December. Countries opened. You can see that there was an improvement. Next slide. On the global meeting scenario, given that we all know that the issues of avoiding any social contact and limiting social contact, there was emphasis on cancelling all congregations of people in one place. We noticed that this is the area that was hit most, because if we look at Africa down there, you see this is a period between March through July 2020. Meetings that were cancelled were 2. Meetings that were postponed were 18. These are international conferences of association, which are association in nature. Association in nature, and they rotate through around several countries, at least 3, and 40% of the participants are from outside the host country. So we are looking at 69 meetings that were planned in Africa to be hosted at that particular time. 21 changed their dates or the host city, or were postponed to a different date, and that accounted for 30.43%. In East Africa, when you look at the arrivals, next slide. When you look at arrivals in East Africa, we note that data that we were able to collect from Uganda, we're going clockwise, anti-clockwise. From Uganda, there was a 69.3% drop in terms of tourism arrivals. In Rwanda, we noted 69.7% drop. In Burundi, we noted 70% drop. In Tanzania, we noted 64.9% drop in 2020. And in Kenya, we noted 72.3%. As we move into the presentation, you'll be able to actually see why some of these drops were very significant. Let's move to the next slide. And I'm done with the introduction. I'll move straight to the study. The study is titled, it's the impact of COVID-19 on tourism and hospitality in East Africa and a proposed policy option. The main objective was to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the sector, generate policy options that the EAC partner states should adopt to protect sector players from COVID-19 disruptions and future pandemics. Specific objectives were to assess the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on tourism and hospitality in the EAC, and not limited to nature/expedition tourism, destination, leisure, MICE, etc. We also needed to analyze the current physical incentives for the sector and propose appropriate interventions. We had to look at the non-tariff barriers that the sector had faced during this period, and also propose recommendation for the tourism sector in the EAC, and finally develop a policy brief out of this study. In doing this study, we took a simple methodology broken in terms of, for data collection, we looked at qualitative, where we interviewed key informants from across the region. I'll get to that. And then we did a quantitative research where we sent questionnaires, online questionnaires to businesses around the region for them to respond with respect to that, and also looked at the various documents that have been compiled, reports, statistical bulletins from the global and the regional level. In terms of data analysis, for qualitative, we looked at reduction, putting this doing reduction from what the interviews provided. For the quantitatives, we did was descriptive statistics. We should be able to project as we proceed. And of course, for the secondary data, we did the analysis and trend analysis, which I was going to project. Then we looked at the results, how the various subsectors of the tourism and hospitality were affected. That is accommodation, food, beverage, operations, travel agents, the MICE industry, airlines, and attraction sites, and eventually the recommendations, which will form the end of the report. Now, when you look at the results and the findings, we noted that the economies were greatly impacted. We see that the GDP for the East African community countries were affected seriously. Burundi recorded a drop of 3.3%. Kenya economic growth rate was constricted up from 5.4 to 1.4. That is 2019 to 2020. We look at Rwanda, the growth was 9.4 in 2019. They actually had a drop to 0.4, minus 0.4. In South Sudan, growth rate was 11.3. It dropped to minus 12 in 2020. Tanzania, we are seeing a growth rate of 6.3 in 2019, which dropped to 2.1% in 2020. And then Uganda, we are seeing 7.5 growth rate of 2019, then dropping to minus 0.5 in 2020. Now, when you look at the effects of the various restrictions that came with the opening, we see that as by December 2020, the EAC partner state had opened, but with caution that adapting to the new normal. We see Burundi flights continue to be suspended, but cross-border movement was allowed, but there was a need for COVID-19 certificate as across the border. You needed to have a mandatory test on arrival, and the quarantine was 5 days. In Kenya, flights resumed from selected countries. COVID certificate was supposed to be valid for 96 hours. There was no mandatory testing on arrival, and quarantine was issued. There was an exemption whether to be quarantined or not. Rwanda flight resumed by December 2020. COVID certificate was required and should be valid for 72 hours. Most of these have been reviewed as of today. The mandatory testing was necessary on arrival. Quarantine to your hotel was on arrival was 24 hours. Sudan flights resumed. South Sudan flight resumed. There was a need for COVID certificate, no mandatory testing on arrival, and quarantine was 14 days. For Tanzania, flights resumed. Sorry, just a minute. There was a requirement for a valid certificate, COVID-19 test certificate valid for 72 hours, no mandatory testing on arrival, and no quarantine. And in Uganda, flights resumed. There was a requirement for COVID certificate, testing for on arrival was required, and quarantine was 14 days. With all these restrictions, we see how it affected visitation to our parks. And this, we'll see that if you look at the second part of that slide, we see the drop in the visitation to parks. For Kenya, it reduced to around 60%. In Rwanda, around 67%. In Tanzania, 61% thereof, and in Uganda, 69% thereof. Now, you'll note that in Rwanda and Uganda, the restriction for movement within the country were more stricter than in Kenya and Tanzania during that that particular period, and that's where you see the visitation in parks in Kenya and Tanzania is better than it was in Rwanda and Tanzania. Now, when you look at the markets, how the markets fared for the countries, next slide. In this particular area, we looked at two countries in the East EAC region. These countries happen to be the ones that had already compiled their data for this particular period. The rest, we couldn't get comprehensive data that we could be able to provide here. Now, we'll see the markets for Kenya, US, UK, India, China, Germany, France, Italy. We note US was seriously hit. China was the beginning, was the source. Italy became an epicenter by 11th of March. So all these markets were seriously affected. They closed borders. There were very little or limited travel outside the country. In Rwanda as well, we're looking at America, UK, Belgium, France, same case. When we move to the next slide, we'll see now the percentage drops in terms of these markets, where we see the Chinese market for Kenya recorded the highest drop, and this is pretty obvious. 80% drop, 80.6%, and Sweden recorded the lowest sort of drop at 65%. For Rwanda, North American market recorded a serious drop, so the largest drop, that is 74.7%. And interestingly, their Israel market recorded a positive growth. This can be attributed to a number of charters that are traveling that happened within the first few months of the COVID before the closures, which basically shows that Rwanda had done a very good marketing in this particular market, and they were able to record a good, a positive growth within that particular market. When you look at the regional markets next for the EAC, we're also going to base on both Kenya and Rwanda, where the statistics are available. We'll see that in Kenya, the largest regional market is Uganda, Tanzania, followed by South Africa and Rwanda, Ethiopia and Nigeria in that order. And we see Rwanda's market, regional market is Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, and Ghana. In the next slide, we see that the markets recorded serious drops, and that is both for Kenya and Rwanda, 75.9% drop for the South African market, and 80.2% drop for the same market for both Kenya and Rwanda. We see the market for Nigeria performed not very different for both countries. So you see Nigeria 70.3% drop for Kenya and 75.2% drop in for Rwanda. We move to the next. Now, when you look at the qualitative, I skipped that. In terms of purpose of visit, we noted that we picked this one from the Rwandan statistics. The Kenyan and the rest of the countries were not conclusive to be able to give a projection for this, but we believe that we can be able to draw some similarities here. The transit market for Rwanda recorded the highest drop at 80.7%. Visiting friends, which is a key market for key purpose for visitors to Rwanda, recorded 76.7, and MICE, which happens to be a currently fast growing in Rwanda, recording a drop of 74.6. Now, when you look at the key informant interviews that we are able to have for this particular survey, we managed to interview the following institutions: East African Community Secretariat, the East African Tourism Platform, Rwanda Chamber of Tourism, Uganda Tourism Association, Tourism Confederation of Tanzania, Kenya Tourism Federation, Kenya National Convention Bureau, Kenya Association of Women in Tourism, and Tourism Society of Kenya. You will realize that we had more responses in Kenya. That was due to the proximity of the researcher to these respondents. And we can move from these interviews. We can summarize in the following slide. All the key informants seem to agree on the following: that tourism was greatly impacted, and I need to say that. And all subsectors were seriously affected with respect to the revenues they were projected and the jobs they lost. And they also agreed that tourism needs to be classified. There's a need to classify the tourism industry as an essential service, given that it supports or mostly the most other sectors of the economy, as an employer and a consumer of agricultural produce. There is a need to sustain some of the fiscal incentives to support full recovery. There is a need to enhance government funding for tourism marketing and promotion. It's important that we establish, or the EAC establishes and deploys and implements a common and uniform crisis response and disaster management mechanism and strategy. There's a need to harmonize and effectively implement the protocols therein in order to support tourism. It's key to note here that out of the discussion, it was found very inconveniencing that one country was implementing different protocols than the other. I've been able to show that in some of the previous slides. And sometimes it was felt it is not very nice. It's very good to impose some of these restrictions. If when a flight is 1 hour from most of the cities, approximately one hour from most of the cities to the other, and it was felt that imposing 96 hours for validity of certificate, imposing quarantine, imposing self-isolation was a bit too harsh for the EAC citizens. Then they agree, all the key informants agree that it's very important to revive joint regional marketing efforts. It also came out that it's important to develop a regional business event strategy, noting that the congregation of people in one area was highly affected. Also, it was recommended, or it was agreed, that there is a need to repackage the domestic and distance the regional tourism offering and offer good rates for EAC citizens to allow movement and enjoyment of the attractions within the East African region. It also agreed that it's important to open the EAC airspace, and most specifically to implement the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement on open airspace for the sole purpose of assisting in bringing the cost of travel within the region down. It was key to note that it is found that it is cheaper to travel to Dubai from Nairobi or from Kigali or from Dar es Salaam or from Entebbe than it is from traveling from Nairobi to Entebbe, Nairobi to Kigali, Nairobi to Dar es Salaam, and vice versa. Now, when you look at the qualitative survey, we did send the questionnaires, online questionnaires to the businesses in tourism around the region. And we can report that we're able to get around 50 responses from 4 countries. That is Kenya. We got 40% of the responses. Rwanda gave us the best response at 45.5%. Uganda gave us 10%, 10.9% of the responses, and Tanzania gave us 3% of the responses, 2.6%. You see that all the responses came from the various subsectors of tourism, from tour operators, hoteliers, travel agencies, restaurants and eateries, business event companies, tour guides, bars, suppliers of food, and from the regional economic bloc, of course, and recreation facilities, and not forgetting to mention the business events venues. Now, with respect to the impacts, it came out that, next slide, please. It came out that in terms of revenue, 75% of the businesses that were involved in this survey recorded that 48% of the businesses say that they lost up to 75% of their projected revenue. 30% lost all revenue, all projected revenue. 12% say they lost 50% of their projected revenue. 6% had to look for different ways of getting revenue, not from their usual business. 2% claim to have lost, just made huge losses. Then when you look at in terms of effect on the impact on staff or employment, most of the business that participated in this survey, 36% of the businesses reduced staff by more than 50%. 22% of the businesses maintain staff on partial pay. 12% of the businesses reduced staff up to 50%. Only 10% maintain staff on full pay. 8% reduced staff by 50% but maintain them on partial pay. 2% of the businesses reduced staff by up to 50% but reduce their working hours by 50%. And the rest, we see they also had to give, they had to apply other measures. Now, when you look at the business models and the modes of operation, we note that 52% of the businesses maintain the same business model but change the mode of operation. This includes modes of operation including either working from home, reducing number of hours, and implementing some of the a number of measures that I'm going to enumerate. 20% of the businesses changed both the model of operation and mode of operation. The business model and operation. 18% of the business closed down or went out of business altogether within that period. And 10% maintained the same business model and same model to survive, or mode of operation to survive. Now, when you look at the non-tariff barriers that were imposed with respect to abiding with the various protocols that were prescribed by the various governments, I need to highlight the two which are the serious impact on the business. We looked at lockdown and curfews, which happen to be the two non-tariff barriers, or two prescription by government to control COVID that affected business severely or catastrophically. We'll see that lockdowns, shown by the darker shade, had severe and catastrophic. And let me just lean on the catastrophic side. 32% of the business identified lockdowns as to have had catastrophic impact on their business. When you look at curfews, which is restriction to the number of operating hours, we see 22% of the business were severely impacted. If we combine both catastrophic and severe for lockdown and curfews, we are noting that 52% of the business were severely and catastrophically affected or impacted by the COVID restrictions, and 40% of the businesses say they were severely and catastrophically impacted by the curfews. Now, when you look at the other non-tariff barriers emanating from COVID-19, these include mandatory testing, the time that took between the test and the results, the space redesigns to effect the social distancing in business premises, mandatory hand washing and sanitizing, mandatory wearing of masks, mandatory testing of travelers as they arrive in the destination, mandatory quarantine of visitors as they arrive on the destination, the application process for reopening licenses, and of course, purchase and use of PPEs for staff in establishment. These did not record serious impacts, but most of the impact have been categorized as between minor, insignificant to moderate, unlike the other two, which really did affect the businesses. Now, when you look at the various incentives provided by the various governments, we have been able to summarize them as in the next slide. We're looking at the policy. Next slide, please. No, before that. Yes, thank you. Looking at the various incentives, as we are able to go through the various documentation and the interviews, the quantity, the quantitative and the questionnaires, we notice from the documentation that Burundi provided. We do not have. We couldn't get information on whether there were any monetary incentives, job and skill, market intelligence, and the rest. In Kenya, we're seeing most of these incentives were provided. In Rwanda, we see only market intelligence incentives were not provided. In Sudan, we only got to know that fiscal incentives were provided. The rest, and of course not, that is a fiscal policy or fiscal incentives and health protocols were made as incentives for the businesses. The rest, we didn't get information or data for that. In Tanzania, we were able to note that physical incentives and monetary incentives were provided. And then, of course, incentives for starting the tourism, health protocols were put together, and incentives to promote the domestic tourism. In Uganda, we see similar, or more or less a similar case, but with this time with a bit of job skill incentives added to without. What we don't see, we didn't be able to identify is whether there were market intelligence incentives or public and private partnership related incentives. Now, out of that survey, we're able to come up with a number of recommended interventions. That is in the next slide, please, which we've been able to summarize in 7 thematic. Please, next slide. we're able to summarize them into 7 thematic areas.
Daniel, you have 5 minutes left, please. You have 5 minutes.
Yes, I'm actually concluding in the next 2 minutes or so. Thank you. So in the next slide. Yes, we're able to cluster the various interventions into 7 thematic areas. And the first one is financial and fiscal incentives, where we note that there's a need to sustain the tax and statutory reductions until the sector recovers, and also to continue with the moratorium on loans until the sector recovers, amongst others. In terms of the other one is public health and medical stock protocols related to that. Here we say that it's important to enhance the access to testing and medication. And also there is a need to roll out a regional-wide vaccination drive to reassure to the market. We see what the Kenyan government has started last week, and we would like to see that one happening around the EAC region, where the tourism industry is actually shown to be given not a preferential treatment, but being shown that something is happening to aid in the recovery of the business. The other one is human capital development. There are 6. I think we did not type number 3. So the thematic areas are 6. So one is human capital development, where there was an emphasis for capacity building for tourism service providers on leveraging on digital technologies. It's important to know that we've seen that tourism, and especially the meetings industry, has moved into the technology or the digital world. And also there's important need to enhance professional standards for tour service providers, including tour operators and tour guides. In terms of tourism product development and marketing, we're looking at building back better. The COVID-19 pandemic has given the tourism industry to relook into the sustainability element of the business, looking at environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and financial sustainability. Please stay a little bit on that one. Thank you. No, tourism, yes, there. And also, we're looking at issues of addressing costs, travel costs in the region. Of course, pursuing the single airspace policy with a lot of urgency. And of course, considering tourism industry as an essential service for its role in the economy. Then the other number 5 on this matter, which is number 6 on the slide, is gender and affirmative action. There was emphasis that we need to look to have a more inclusive stakeholder and strategic partner engagement on the areas of priorities for recovery by considering all these different groups of people. And of course, provide financial incentives and mitigation measures to support women, youth, and SMEs. Then lastly, there's a crisis management mechanism where every player felt that there is a need to develop and establish a harmonized regional tourism crisis management mechanism. And of course, it is very important to educate the masses on these pandemics. That basically brings me to the end of the presentation, and we can open. I'm looking forward to your questions as per the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Daniel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for undertaking this research and pulling out the most important and crucial elements that need to be addressed. And I like the part where you're mentioning that when they were implementing the regional vaccination drive, and I think the recommendation should be that the industry players in the tourism industry to be classified under the category of people really need essential category that needs this vaccine. So this is very important, and those recommendations, the thematic recommendations are well noted, and of course participants will react to those. I see Mr. Edward Kaiwa, you've had your hand on since the beginning. Would you just, if you have a question input, please type it in the chat. We'll take care of it. Thank you very much. Otherwise, let's have the last presentation by Mr. Duncan Kaira, who also worked on the impact of COVID on agriculture and food security. Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan. Over to you.
Sorry, Geoffrey.
Yes, Chairman.
Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes. On the presentation on tourism, let me add one or two things that I think should be captured at this point. That number one, there should be a systematic mutual recognition arrangement, either by way of memorandum or something, to recognize certification for vaccination across the region. I think it's an important point to be captured, as well as the COVID test certificate. So now that we are at the vaccination point, we need, I think, to be pitching for harmonized, recognition of the certificate, so that you don't, if you get vaccinated in one country, the certificate is recognized across the border. I think you need to capture that in that protection, so that we will put it to governments as a recommendation.
Thank you, Honorable Vice Chair. That is actually captured. I've just probably did not mention in my presentation, but it's well noted.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much. It's very, very important and pertinent. Thank you. If no other, please, Mr. Duncan, can you please name your presentation?
Okay, that's my presentation. I hope all of you are able to see it. Do you see it?
Yes, Duncan. Go ahead, please. 15 minutes maximum. Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Geoffrey. My name is Duncan Kaira. Greetings from Kampala. It is wet and sunny, and I'm happy to present today the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on agriculture and the food security situation in the East African community. I thank the funders, East African Business Community, the Eabc-Aerc, and the other funding partners for this study. The outline of my presentation is as follows. I'll start off with the background and the context in which the assignment was commissioned, and then I'll take us through the objectives of the assignment, the methodology we adopted, and then we shall delve into the main findings. And the main findings, we shall look at a couple of subsectors, starting with the actual impact of COVID on the overall agriculture and food security in the EAC. And then I'll look at the impact of COVID on the coffee sector, the horticulture sector, the maize sector, the tea sector, the rice sector. We shall also assess the effectiveness of the interventions put in place by partner states on the impact on the agriculture sector, how they have supported or inhibited growth of the sector. And then the NTBs arising from the COVID pandemic with respect to agriculture sector. And I'll conclude the presentation with policy recommendations on how we can how we could have better addressed the pandemic and its impact on the sector. The next, so I'll delve into the study itself, the background and context. The background and context, we're all aware that in each of the 6 partner states of the EAC, agriculture is the mainstay and the background of the economy. The sector accounts for more than 32% of the region's GDP. It employs over 80% of the labor force. It accounts for about 65% of foreign exchange earnings and contributes more than 50% of raw materials to the industrial sector. There's a graph there which shows the main crops and also how much in each country GDP agriculture how much the agriculture sector contributes to GDP. It's quite, this figure, the letters are a bit small, but I can help you read. In South Sudan, the main crops, we have sorghum and millet and maize. In Kenya, the main crops, maize, wheat, beans. Agriculture contribution there is about 21%. Tanzania, agriculture contribution to GDP is about 29%, and main crops have maize, cassava, rice. Burundi, we're looking at about 40% of agriculture GDP to agriculture GDP, yes. Rwanda, about 33%. And the main crops there's plantain, potatoes, and maize. And Uganda, we have about 25% contribution of GDP, and the main crops there is plantain and cassava. In terms of the background, again, despite the huge importance of the sector to the economy, as we have seen in the earlier slide, the agriculture sector is fragile and highly sensitive to shocks arising from internal and external factors, particularly climate change, pests, and also partner states' physical policy frameworks. It's therefore prudent and most likely that the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic in the region could have had disastrous effects on the sector, which necessitates critical assessment of its impact and efficacy or failure of the measures taken to dispel and contain the pandemic. So this study has been commissioned to take an inventory of the impact of the COVID pandemic on the agriculture and food security. And these are, given the fact that these are very crucial for survival and the livelihood of the EAC partner states. So that's the background and context in which the assignment was commissioned. In terms of the objectives of the assignment, the overall objective was to assess the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the agriculture and food security in the region and generate policy options that partner states should adopt to protect supply chains from the pandemic disruptions and also future pandemics. The specific objectives were fourfold. The first one, we had to assess the impact of the pandemic, that's COVID, on the sector, agriculture and food security, with a specific emphasis on five subsectors, sorry, that is maize, rice, coffee, tea, and horticulture. Then the second specific objectives, we had to assess the agriculture stimulus packages put in place by the 6 partner states, how effective they are, and also propose workable alternatives. And the next subspecific objectives, were to analyze the current fiscal incentives, specifically to the agriculture sector, and how effective they are, and also propose alternatives where they could not have worked very well. And lastly, we assessed the non-tariff barriers arising from the COVID-19 pandemic affecting the agriculture sector. So that was the overall objective and the specific objectives of the assignment. The methodology we adopted, we executed the assignment in 3 phases, all of them interrelated, and each with a set of activities and outputs. Phase 1 and 2 was dedicated to mobilization and planning. We had a planning meeting with AERC and EABC, and they guided us on expectations. They also guided us on how the papers should be presented. They gave us a format. They also gave us an introduction letter that we used to collect data from the different institutions. And they also supported us in accessing information and also gave us some literature, latest report. I remember one which was done by, I think, Naliaka. Phase 3 was the actual execution of the assignment. And in this, we use what they call the participatory analytical techniques. And they were threefold in these ones. The first one was what was dedicated to, please excuse me. Guys. We have the techniques as a comprehensive. The first one was dedicated to comprehensive review of literature and material using the content analysis technique. The second one we conducted a limited survey in Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda amongst smallholder farmers in the coffee, maize, tea, and horticulture sectors. And the last one, we conducted key informant interviews, and these were entirely virtual. The methodology adopted still, these are the list of the organizations that we worked with and the information we collected. From the public sector, we collected information from the Ministry of Finance and Planning, Ministry of Agriculture, Industry, Trade, Education, Agriculture Research Organization, central banks, custom and cross-border agencies, export promotion boards, and National Bureau of Statistics. And the information was varied depending on the agency. For example, Ministry of Finance, we focused on related fiscal and monetary policies, revenue collection trends, agriculture ratio to GDP, which I've already presented, domestic revenue mobilization structures. In agriculture, the Ministry of Agriculture, we collected sector growth and decline and reasons for those declines or growth. Ministry of Industry, raw material supplies, commodity prices, Ministry of Trade, agriculture commodity exports. In education, we focus on the impact of closure schools on food and commodity prices. Central banks, we focus on export trends. And the National Bureau of Statistics, we focused on economy and sector-specific status and trends. So that's our methodology, the methodology we adopted. Now, before we delve into the findings, we also looked at the private sector organizations and development partners. And there we'll do the survey on the impact of COVID on businesses and farmers, and also the interventions embraced by the government and their impact on the businesses. And then development partners, we looked at loan restructuring programs with a focus on agriculture. Also the stimulus packages that were put in place with a focus on agriculture. So that's what our methodology, and those are the organizations that participate in the survey and the information we collected. Now we delve into the main findings of this assignment. The main findings, we shall start off with the impact of COVID on the agriculture sector. We learned that the impact of COVID on agriculture was incipient upon containing measures to curb the spread of the pandemic were put in place. The containment measures drifted a sizable number of agriculture households, estimated at over 15 million, into poverty, whereby these were depending on less than $1 a day. Particularly in this respect to agriculture, these were mainly smallholder farmers. In terms of the growth trend, the contribution of the agriculture sector to GDP, a focus on 2020, we noticed that in Kenya and Tanzania, there was a bit of resilience. However, the sectoral contribution was significantly lower, as you notice, just between less than 10% in either. Yet in actual, on a non-COVID or non-pandemic, the sector usually contributes as much as 20%. In terms of Rwanda and Uganda, those are the two countries that recorded a retarded curve in terms of growth. Rwanda registering a negative growth in the first two quarters, but recovering later in the last quarter. For Uganda, the impact was significant, as you see there. The first two quarters, negative 7.5, negative 4.7 for Q2. However, it recovered significantly in Q3. Data for Q4 was not readily available, but at least this paints a picture on the impact of the pandemic on the agriculture sector within the first few months when it was announced. So the sector on average contributes about 20%, but if you look at the trend, with the risk, all countries are literally below 10%. So the impact was indeed significant on the sector. Now, the next slide looks at the impact of COVID on the food security. We learned from KII, that's Key Informant Interviews, and data we collected from the institution, that the 2020 estimate of food security for the 5 of the 6 partner states was 2 to 5% higher than the pre-COVID scenario, as illustrated in the table below. As I was reading through, I think you can analyze the content of the table. The number of food insecure people in the region increased from 59 million to 65.1 million. And I think you see the trend there. Burundi, the increase was significant, even for Kenya, at about 4.7 for Burundi, or close to 5. Kenya about 4.5. Rwanda, 3.5. Tanzania and Uganda were quite close at 2.5. So that's the increase of food insecure people within 2020 compared to 2019. We also learned that with the exception of Kenya and Tanzania, all the other countries did not have functional food reserves. We have strong policy documents like the ESC Food and Nutrition Security Action Plan, which espouses for harmony in laws amongst all these ESC partner states to put in place food reserves. So that's on food security, on the impact of COVID on food security in the region. The next slide looks at the impact of COVID on the food gap in the ESC. And as a result of the low economic growth prospects of the ESC region, the food gap in the region was 13.5% higher for 2020. And the region needed about 338 metric tons of grains to meet this deficit, vis-a-vis a regional production of 55 million tons per annum. And that table demonstrates also what the situation was like for the food gap, pre-COVID estimates, and also the actual COVID time, how the estimate looked. And the change was most significant in Tanzania and Rwanda, whereby we saw a 25.3 increment in Kenya, the same level of relatively higher increment for Rwanda at 17.9, and it was least surprisingly in Rwanda. By way of background, food gap is defined as the amount of food needed by all food insecure people to reach a caloric intake target, and this indicates the level of food security. So the calories per capita per day are helped to measure the intensity of food security at aggregate levels. So that's how the region fared. So indeed, the impact of COVID was severe on the food security, as the earlier slide showed, and also the calorie intake here, the food gap. And that is how the situation looked. Now, the next slide looks now at the different sectors, the impact of COVID on the coffee sector. From consultations with relevant officials in the Ministry of Agriculture and also the farmers in this sector, we learned that the advent of the COVID-19 coincided with the early harvesting season of coffee. That's the one from March to June. And containment measures that had been enforced by partner states constrained financial resources, leading to deep budget cuts that seriously affected the provision of coffee quality enhancing services like extension services, fertilizer application, pest and disease management, farmers and household. And this was felt actually also in the actual exports and volumes that were recorded during that period. We have the first graph there for Kenya, a bit of resilience in the first month from February to June. However, July onwards, there was a decline, as you see the graph declining, both for exports and the prices, the value of the value of exports that we picked. I mean, the value that came from the export that were traded. Uganda had a relatively unique situation, not very significant impact, and actually, ironically, Uganda had, relatively stronger growth during the pandemic, unlike 2019. But that's how the structure of the trade was, with a small dip between April and June, picking up in July, but however declining, but not significantly, from August to November. How about the other countries? Here, for the sake, in this case of Rwanda and Burundi, we noticed that export volumes and earnings were dampened at the peak of the pandemic, however recovered when restrictions were eased from August onwards. And the major reason that for this uneven growth was due to challenges farmers faced also in selling their coffee beans. For some of the farmers we interviewed, we learned that the prices that were offered were very non-competitive, and because farmers could not, some of them take their beans to the mills, and for those who offered, there was no guarantee that they will be offered a good price. So that's the trend you see for the case of Rwanda. It really dipped but picked up. Burundi has a special graph. You see it's very cyclic, with ideally June recording very few, exporting very few volumes and trade, however picking up later from August onwards. The same case was for Tanzania, but in the interest of time, we haven't presented the Tanzania graph, but similar trend was recorded. Now the next sector was horticulture, and we learned from KIIs and also the statistics we picked, that Uganda and Rwanda horticulture exports in the first 9 months of 2020 registered cyclic growth, with the month of March, April, and May most affected, with significantly low values of export. The sector has nonetheless recovered in June, however, registered a decline in September and October. So that's the graph, very cyclic. The case of Uganda and the case of Rwanda. Rwanda having really a big dip in the month of April, from March to May, however, picking up June onwards, but still a decline up to October. One of the limitations to the study, that the data that we could pick would go as far as this. So it wasn't our wish for us to present data as far as October, but that's what was available and uniformly for all countries. But nonetheless, it paints a picture of how the sector, the COVID pandemic affected horticulture sector. So that was Uganda and Rwanda. Let us go to the other countries. Kenya, the growth was generally even, as you notice, if I can draw on my notes to explain Kenya's situation, please excuse me. We found that in Kenya, the sector performance was generally even, though we learned that the floriculture sector was affected following the closure of the Dutch auction, where Kenya flowers are sold and vegetables and food subsectors are also sold. However, we learned that there were minimal disruptions in performance of the sector. There was high demand for Kenya fruits and vegetables. Leave alone for the flowers, there was high demand for fruits and vegetables, born from major disruptions in local markets in major European and Middle Eastern countries, following the effects of the pandemic in those countries. And also, we also learned that the government put aside $15 million US to assist the sector, that's horticulture and flower producers, to continue accessing international markets. In Tanzania, it was really a big hit, as you'd see. February to August, indeed, the performance was really low, extremely low. And there we learned that the sector in Tanzania, it lost as much as $64 million US per month because of the pandemic. However, it peaked in the month of September and October. So that is the horticulture sector. Now let us go into the maize sector. Maize sector, the first countries we review are Burundi and Rwanda. And in Rwanda and Burundi, maize production was clearly depressed by the measures put in place to contain the spread of the pandemic. If you notice the planting seasons for Burundi, there was a peak from February to June. However, a very, very huge slump in growth from July to September. In Rwanda, the impact was immediate, whereby from February to June, we moved from 354 tons from the previous season, that is from season A, February to February, from 2019 February season A season, and then we see in season B, February to June, the impact was significant, reducing growth to only less than 100,000 tons of maize compared to close to 400,000 in the previous season. In Tanzania and Uganda, the volumes of maize production remained progressively low for the period March to April, and in turn exports declined in a similar manner as shown in the graphs below. The same was true for Uganda, as you see the graph. So Tanzania, at the beginning of the pandemic, February, growth was high, but it declined. There was a decline, as you see, from March, April onwards, and even by October, there was not much recovery. In Uganda, it was cyclic, whereby March, April, May, there was really a significant slump. It picked up in June up to August. However, it declined significantly in the next month from September, October. So that's how the pandemic affected the sector, maize sector, in those countries. I've only put this, but in the paper actual research report, we have also more graphs on all the other countries, but in the interest of effectiveness and time, we have kept it to those to illustrate the impact. The other countries had a similar trend in terms of how the sector was affected. Now, tea. We learned that the most delicate link in the tea value chain is that between picking and reaching the factory for curing. In practice, tea is meant to be picked every 9 days before the shoots overgrow. Tea estates endeavor to pick it in time before it overgrows using semi-hired skilled workers. For those who have worked in tea factories or know how the tea factory works, the tea, they usually pick the buds, 2 buds and the leaf. So, and if you fail to pick this within 9 days, then these buds become hard and they don't make good tea. So the factories, the estates endeavor to pick it within 9 days when they're still soft. That way they can make a very good aroma to the tea. So we learned that the advent of the COVID pandemic and its measures, particularly lockdown, could have devastating effect on the sector since it halted all farming activities. However, because of good lobbying by tea factories, it was designated, tea farming was designated as an essential service. The tea industry was excluded from the nationwide lockdown, and it allowed movement and the tea estates to continue picking those 2 buds and the leaf. However, now, irrespective of that notwithstanding, the sector succumbed to the impact of the COVID pandemic with uneven volumes and values of growth on exports, and born from reduced orders and demand impacting negatively on the prices. The next graph demonstrates that growth, whereby you see in Uganda, the graph looked like that. And these prices were significantly lower than the ones of 2019. The same applies for Kenya. The trade at the Mombasa auction was significantly low. The prices were significantly low, below $2, which is not good. Tanzania, the trend was like that, as you see. And Rwanda, the same case. So that was the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the tea sector. So price-wise, were significantly low. Even export volumes were significantly low. The impact of the COVID pandemic on the rice sector, we learned from key informant interviews that the pandemic and its containment measures found rice in many growing areas at an advanced stage that required limited external inputs for weeding, bird caring, harvesting, threshing, and sorting. In the areas where rice required external inputs, farmers were affected in 2 ways. One, the rising input prices due to limited availability because some raw input dealers were hesitant to travel to urban areas because of the lockdown to purchase these inputs. And then farm gate prices declined significantly in response to lower retail prices in urban areas. Suppliers of seeds, fertilizers, and pesticides were not affected, however, because the pandemic was announced in mid-March when farmers had already planted rice, and rice was already at a growing stage that required minimal inputs. From a trade perspective, the impacts of the pandemic was significant. And from the research report, which you, I believe, will be provided with, in Uganda and Tanzania had a declining curve from February onwards. And Uganda, the growth was cyclic with a dip in the month of April and May, picking up in August, however, declining further from the month of September onwards. So that was the analysis on the impact of COVID on those 6 sectors. Now, we assess the effectiveness of the interventions put in place by the government to support businesses in the sector. So we reviewed the SME stimulus packages that ideally would broadly cater for enterprise in the agriculture sector, and we found that like Mr. Daniel presented earlier, there was a mix of monetary, physical, and regulatory measures. However, since the agriculture sector in all partner states is dominated by informal smallholder businesses, these contribute about 90%. It's unlikely those farmers benefited from above stimulus packages as they were designed for formal enterprises. And this is the case. I mean, I'm a farmer myself, and without a formally registered business, you could not benefit from, let us say, a program with the Uganda Development Bank. So these programs were designed for the formal sector, oblivious, I suspect, of the fact that many of the businesses in this sector are typically informal. So despite good intentions, the majority of the farmers were excluded and they did not benefit from these programs. In Kenya and Uganda, where sector-specific physical financial support was allocated to the agriculture sector, the packages were indeed very, very small, estimated at 0.02% of the total stimulus packages, and yet the sectors contribute 20 to 30% of the GDP. So I think this is a mismatch in terms of how the government was allocating packages to support the culture sector. Here we talk more about Uganda, where the sector received about 300 million, vis-a-vis a total package of close to $735 million. So you see the sector was not prioritized that much, despite the fact that it contributes significantly to GDP. It employs the highest number of farmers, or I mean, the labor force is highest there. And also it contributes significantly in the industrial sector through raw material availability. We also did some more analysis in terms of interventions for those that benefited from the stimulus packages. How was the disbursement? And from that graph, you see that agro-industry was given as much as close to 140 close to $140 million, million shillings. However, what was dispersed was significantly low, as you see that bar in green. Let us focus again still to agriculture on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on the 6 rows. That is primary agriculture. It was awarded above 140 million shillings. However, what has been dispersed is only about 70 million shillings. Tourism, for my colleague Daniel, I think you see how much has been dispersed vis-a-vis what was allocated. So, yes, despite the intentions, even for that has been committed, it's not fully realized, meaning that indeed its impact would also be not as expected, given the fact that what was originally budgeted to have a significant turnaround has not been dispersed to those particular sectors. Now, these are the second last slide. The NTBs arising from the COVID pandemic. From KIIs and also meeting with farmers, we learned that almost all COVID-19 containment measures imposed by partner states were defined as non-tariff barriers. Each containment measure barred people, irrespective of age, nationality, from access to a set of commodities or services, of which the most was the lockdown. These policy measures also affected market activity, which further limited supply of staple foods and basic goods. Challenges encountered in the implementation of health and transport protocols by the different partner states and borders resulted in loss of quantities of products intended for export, as my colleagues mentioned in the first presentation, Mr. Walakila. And then also supply is disproportionate to demand, causing prices in local markets to drop, as we see in the main paper. If you have access to it, I think it will be shared with you. And the closing of the borders during the pandemic led to reduced agricultural imports and delays in access to international food assistance, particularly in South Sudan. The last section of this presentation are policy recommendations, and I've just picked out the major ones. First of all, the first one we propose is to increase the COVID stimulus package to the agriculture sector from just 0.02% to about 10%, and this is the one which is also devised by the CAD, the Comprehensive Agriculture Program, to about 157 million. Presently, it's just $3.14 million. Then the second recommendation we propose is to establish the EAC Food Reserve. As such a reserve could help ensure a coordinated regional response in times of crisis and get food where it's needed more quickly. However, the funding requirement is quite high. We did some calculations and also benchmarked with other countries, and this we shall need about $1 billion US dollars for the entire region, putting in place this reserve and also stocking it. We also proposed a regional ICT-enabled raw material information tracking system for major staple foods to determine stocks at local level, to enable relevant MDAs to know the quantity, stocks available, the allocation and price, such that we can know which areas are most affected and how they can be supported. Lastly, we propose that there is a need for a COVID-19 regional response plan that aims to ensure a joint and well-coordinated mechanism to fight and keep COVID-19 at bay, ensuring that the region has adequate capacity for well-funded and coordinated food security surveillance and mitigation arrangement. I thank you so much for your attention. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan. Very good recommendations there, especially on the AEC security reserve, food reserves. It's very important, I think, to ensure that the insecurity gap that was shown on the first slide then is we can get away with that. And also the effect on export volumes and competitive prices by the agricultural traders is very important. I think it was picked up. And we look forward to this report and the inputs from the participants in this validation. Thank you very much. I now open the Q&A session. Please still welcome the questions and comments to the presentation. Yes.
Duncan?
Yes, sir. Yes, Chairman.
Yes, just one the point Duncan made at the very last end of your presentation, that the study recommends there should be a regional coordinated action plan for mitigating COVID-19 effects. I think because we already have there's a regional board, there is a regional coordinated plan, there's a regional action plan. It exists. So in my view, why don't you rephrase it to say, despite the existence of the regional coordinated plan, it is pretty much in theory, but the practice has been different from the theory of it.
Understood. Thank you so much. I'll take that on board.
Yeah, so there is already a coordinated, a regional. You remember it started with the sharing of information on numbers of patients, numbers of cases identified, patients discharged, dead. Yeah, so that exists, but it is quite much in theory. Practically, it died.
Thank you so much. I've taken note of that comment, and I will
rephrase your last bit just to call on the readers or the consumers of these documents that this policy be implemented as was designed, and then we move together.
Thank you, sir. I've taken note of that.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can go through the questions that came through the chat room. And the first question goes to Mr. Godfrey Walakira. Question from Estella from the markup program at the EAC Secretariat. And she says, since the pandemic has changed the structure of demand for certain products and logistics, are there recommendations around, one, supporting the private sector to tap into innovation, e.g. specialized funds, fostering B2B linkages, etc., and also improving access to affordable and reliable internet services. And question number 2 comes from Sylvester, who is from the Eabc, and he says, can the report have figures, statistics regarding the impact on industry output and revenue streams? And maybe Duncan could respond to those as we welcome others. Thank you. Sorry, Walakira, Godfrey Walakira.
Yeah, thank you, Geoffrey and Stella. In terms of what I presented, in terms of the PowerPoint, I picked out the key issues that would be relevant in terms of understanding and picking out the policy recommendation. In terms of the suggestion, the existing mechanisms that would support the private sector, there are some that were indicated in the report in terms of increasing the financial aspect when you go to the main report in terms of what governments would do. Like when you look at it from the aspect of the fiscal policy side, and when we say, like, one of the big challenges of most of the manufacturers, the ones who have been filing returns with most of the revenue authorities, the biggest has been in terms of the VAT refunds. And when you assess in terms of what I would call the turnaround time of how long it takes a manufacturer to receive his payment from the Revenue Authority, you'd find in terms of the existing turnaround, it has become a bottleneck in terms of the cash flow, on the cash flow side of the manufacturers. Then the other aspect in terms of funding in line with the existing development banks or development corporations, we find within the existing member states already initiatives are there, funds are there, but the only challenge that I think is existing is in terms of the utilization of the funds and in terms of which sectors are benefiting. In terms of the industrial statistics and revenues, when you go to the main report, they're included, but for my presentation, I tried to avoid putting the figures, but I can put them there. But in the report, they're there in terms of what has happened in terms of the industries. And when you look at it in terms of the report itself, some of the findings are mainly country specific in terms of what has happened in each country in terms of the export volumes, import volumes, then the aspects of the industries that have been affected in terms of the GDP, and in terms of the bigger understanding, the effects were based on terms of the availability of data that was on the different data sources of the central banks and the statistical offices of the respective countries. Hopefully I've answered them, but others, I think I can add them in the report in case he has read and he hasn't seen some of them. I can add them in. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. I think it is important. I also actually concur with Sylvester. That is very important information. The statistics speak volumes. Numbers don't lie. So it is important to have the statistics to show the revenue streams that have been lost due to this pandemic. So to be, if people are planning, they plan accordingly. Thank you very much. So the next question goes to Duncan. This comes from Mr. Nathan Gasheja, also from Eabc Secretariat. And he says, Dear Duncan, would you dissect stock disaggregate statistics in terms of COVID-19 for the enablers of agriculture trade, such as transport logistics on the agriculture sector from other challenges that affected this sector during COVID-19 pandemic? Thank you.
Thanks, Geoffrey. The question would, I picked it, would you dissect disaggregate statistics in terms of COVID-19 for the enablers of agriculture trade, such as, yes. To be sincere, yes, this will be possible, but I have to point out that we had significant limitations on how the data was coming in. I recall that we also had to even postpone the submission of the first drafts. So this is really dependent on our central banks and the statistical bodies that supplied us this information. I'll try to look deeper, but what I've presented was as much as the depth from what they're provided. But I'll try to look deeper and see how I can address this comment, and I thank you for it. I'll try to dig deep and see how, probably also probe them more for more, so that we can see how this can be presented in a way that addresses this particular question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Duncan. Maybe to add on to my colleague, probably also look at to dissect or disaggregate the effects from other pandemics such as the locusts outbreak, etc. If that would, I think that would be if it's possible, then that would be very important to see the effect of COVID, less other disasters. Thank you very much. Another question, hello, I'm Stephen representing the PSF Rwanda. Could you have captured statistics showing the effects in a linked manner? I mean, using the backward and forward linkages amongst the three sectors. I think maybe this is a question to all the panelists, but sorry, to the consultants. I don't know whether I understand the question. would you have captured statistics showing the effects in a linked manner? Then he means using the backward and forward linkages amongst the three sectors. Maybe start with you, Duncan, and maybe the other two. Very quickly.
I think anybody can jump on it.
Sure.
Any of the consultants can jump on it.
Okay. I would say thank you. In terms of capturing the linkages, that is a very good proposal. But when you look at it in terms of the existing data we have right now, some of the linkages, we can easily identify them. From the aspect of sourcing raw materials, now like if I'm taking it from the side of manufacturing, up to the point of what is being produced and exported, yeah, the linkages can easily be identified. That is by mainly disaggregating in terms of the inputs and raw materials that are being imported and are mainly specific for industrial use. Then at the same time, you look at it from the aspect of what has been produced from the final side, which is the final output. Then you give in terms of the total value. But in terms of dissecting and knowing the effects per chain, it will depend, I think, on the data sources we have. But generally, some of them we can easily pick them. That would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Geoffrey, sorry, my own comment on that one would be that needless to say, there has been effect on the three resulting from each one of them. Because take manufacturing, for example, who are the consumers of the products of manufacturing? So the consumers have not been able to purchase because they lack, they do not have income, which they would ordinarily get from the other services. For example, people who are employed in tourism, imagine how many people have lost jobs in tourism. I think you gave us a figure. In the tourism and hospitality industry, the numbers of people who lost employment in that sector. Now, all those who lost employment ordinarily would be the consumers of the manufactured goods. Now, with loss of income, they have equally not been able to purchase that much or in the same manner as they did from the agriculture, from the products in the agriculture sector. So, whereas it might be tricky to quantify by way of figures, but certainly there are linkages, backward and backward linkages in terms of how each has affected the other. Or they could take it further to define numbers, but in my view, to a large extent, the three have affected, one has affected the other, and in that manner.
Thank you, Chairman. That's absolutely right. There's no way one cannot affect the other, and I think the consultants have taken notes, and that is very important to be featured in the main report. I see a hand from East African Tourism Platform. Evening, Genzi, please, you could ask a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Geoffrey, for this opportunity. And again, congratulations for this report that we presented today. And to the consultant for tourism as well, congratulations, Daniel. I just wanted to make a quick point is that really the recommendations to captured are very important, and the Fiscal Tourism Platform will be also keen to implement together with the Eabc and other partners these recommendations. In terms of recovery, there is need to ensure that we fast track the tourism recovery plan. This has been in the on way working on for some time now, but we need the regional tourism recovery plan to be fast tracked and implementation started. So this is something that we can push as private sector. The second thing that I wanted to mention is about I think both the chairman also mentioned about it, the harmonization of protocols. So there is a need to ensure that the PCR certificates are recognized across the region. Because once you have a PCR certificate from Kenya, you're going to Uganda, it needs to be recognized. So you don't have to test again. If you're going to Rwanda and you're getting real test again, this is making the cost of travel, the regional cost of travel expensive, and it is hindering really the resumption of travel in the region. So a recognition of the vaccines, but also the PCR tests, because we still need them, as well in terms of the impact on jobs. I wanted to get clarification from the consultant. We saw the impact on job losses from the respondents at 2%. And from what we saw in the sector, we saw that at some point it was really high. We lost a lot of people that were employed in the sector. And in some cases, in some countries, it reached up to 80%. So I wanted to get that clarification in terms of how is it quantified to be at 2%. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Eve. I think the consultants have taken note, more of an input and a question to that, which was also alluded to by the chairman. I think that's a recommendation to take. Two more questions to go, then we go call upon the panel, to very powerful panel that we have here today, to really react to most of these presentations, but also sharing their own experiences. One is from Duncan Ondu. He says, although not related to COVID-19, the seed sector in Kenya will want to get the EABC support on the issue of certificate of conformity on maize seed in Uganda. This is working as a hindrance to trade to our members. Can you share an email address that we can follow up with? Thank you very much. I'll share my email address, and my colleague Lamek Kwesonga, who is in charge of this specific NTB, and we'll take the conversation further. One last question comes from, it's actually not a question, it's a comment, it's a recommendation from Ariada Stella, JZTZ. Please include a recommendation for governments and private sector to increase use of ICT/digitization and e-government to improve efficiency, competitiveness, and service delivery. Thank you. And this cuts across all the other sectors. If no question, please. Thank you much, dear participants, consultants, for the very, very good work done. At this point, I will welcome Mark Real to moderate the session on the panel session. Please, I request everyone to keep around. This is a very, very important session we've gone to. Because to speak live of what has happened and what shapes the future going forward. So thank you very much, Mark. I submit to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Let me say that it has been very, very interesting. Great. The only thing is the time constraint. Of course, as we look at our timetable, we should have been concluding by now. Then let me request that we allocate ourselves another 15 minutes so that we conclude in 15 minutes. If that's agreeable, members, allow me then to call the panel to order. In our panel today, we have 3 panelists, Vimal Shah, the chairman of Bidco Group, and we have also Dennis, but I understand is represented by Mugurwe Ndionya, and the third is Jacqueline. I don't know whether Jacqueline is represented by somebody else. Yes, so then.
Representing Jacqueline.
Pardon?
I'm representing Dr. Jacqueline King from Taha.
Oh, I didn't get your name.
My name is Ndewe Mungure.
Gure.
Yes, Ndewe Mungure.
Thank you very much, Ndewe Mungure. So you are representing Jacqueline. Then I think normally we would ask panelists to have a first introductory, remarks, and then later on we ask question, and then finally probably a final remark. But because of time, I will just want each of the panelists to quickly give us his or her experiences in terms of what is the impact of the COVID to your particular industry. What is your experience? And then what do you think are really the 2-3 policy options that can be adopted by the stakeholders? So let me begin with
sorry, interruption. Sorry, did you say somebody is representing me? Because I'm here, so it's okay if somebody wants to represent me.
So let us clarify. Vimal, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Welcome, thank you. Then we have Dennis Carrera.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I am here, but I had somebody representing me. I don't know who that is.
It's called Dennis Carrera.
You would have to pay. You would have to pay for that.
I think you might have confused. Yeah, I think you might have confused me representing Dennis instead of Dr. Jacqueline Kindi.
All
yeah,
right.
I think so.
So let us begin then with Vimal. Please give us your experiences, in a good summary. What are the real impacts of the COVID to the manufacturing industry? Then what do you propose? Quickly, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dennis. Good afternoon, everyone. I think very, very fast. When I looked at the report, I saw the 61-page report and I saw the slides also. I would have loved to see the real situation on the ground as to what's really happening currently, because I think some of the policy options shown there are just incentives and things like coordination with national chapters, boost productivity, efficiency. These are all generic things. I think we need to have specifics. What would have been the impact? If I look at it from an impact perspective, the governments in some countries gave some sort of reprieve for a few months or a few in 2020. But 2021, again, we've got the second wave or the third wave, as we would call it. Did that really help manufacturing? And I think I'll limit myself to manufacturing only because I think that's what my subject is. And I think when you look at that, did it make us more competitive? Did it make us less competitive? So when we talk about reduced consumption, I think demand from the retail sector became lower, but consumers still consumed what they were consuming. So overall, did we meet this consumption by local production? Did we repurpose ourselves? Did we have incentives to quickly repurpose and start looking at those things? Or did we become much more bigger, larger importers of foreign manufactured products into our industries? And I think that's another thing where we could have used this. In my opinion, the 6 East African countries could have used this opportunity to say, let's reunite immediately, remove all the borders within. Whatever is locally produced within Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, let's make sure it gets distributed across the region without any issues. Remove the non-tariff barriers immediately. Make East Africa one market quickly. In fact, that would have been a serious opportunity I would have seen. On the contrary, we became more tougher. Our border controls became difficult. Our movement across borders became more and more difficult. And I think this is where we all went wrong as East Africa. So I would have seen that. I would have wanted to see that. Look, we can open up, number one. Number two, VAT refunds, PAYE, whatever you say, reduced taxation, agreed. But our governments are running short of these sort of revenues. And therefore, you cannot really count on them to start giving you a lot of these reliefs or whatever. But I think VAT refunds would have been a simple thing straight away. Number two, make us more competitive. There's a lot of produce within East Africa. Can we now start exchanging that quickly without any issues? I think Kenya put restrictions on maize from Tanzania and Uganda. That shouldn't have been done at all. We just need to make sure we become one, united quickly. Number two, CET. The CET reforms could have been done quickly and fast-tracked. Remove all the states, make it all one market. And really, we would have done a lot more there. Digitization is in. Let's make all of them e-government. Everything is done by electronic movements. So overall, we would have digitized the economies much more faster. And I think if you look at the global situation, everybody's talking about local value added, localization. Let's make East Africa totally local and say, fine, reduce the impediments to flow. All the restrictions we bring in about this and that, we are East Africa. And I speak here at this platform because we are talking about East Africa being one market. We could have done this much more faster. So all I want to see in the recommendations, because I don't see that coming up, this would have been seriously, immediately remove all non-tariff barriers, remove tariff barriers, and remove restrictions, remove the states, make the CET happen faster. We all have time. We can actually get this thing done quickly. So incentives, the impact of incentives, when you talk about it in the report, you need to put down, did those incentives that were given to various reliefs, did they really help manufacturing? Did they not? Did they help light manufacturing? Did they improve our competitiveness? I believe it didn't. It didn't, except for the reduction on PAYE was something that helped. But overall, I think a rapid results proposal would have been likely. I would have wanted to see a quick, rapid results. Let's get EAC immediately onto the bandwagon, get things moving, and really make East Africa one market. Why I say this? Because in January, we opened up ACFTA for Africa Continental Free Trade Area. East Africa had an opportunity here. COVID or no COVID, we could have done so much more faster. But we can still do it. I think one of the benefits, one of the policy options shown there is extension of tax relief to end of June 2021. We're already there, and they won't be coming. So I think the recommendations need to be much more immediate to say, fine, continue for this year because the next wave is also here. So all I would say is let's make manufacturing more competitive. Let's do more localization, really improve our farms, improve our agribusiness, improve our local value addition. And that would have something I would want to see specifically there. I didn't see that, and I think I would want us to see that in the manufacturing report. I'll rest my case there. Thanks.
Thank you, Shah. We have got you loud and clear. Let us. We lost an opportunity because we maintained the tariff barriers. We should have removed this. We should have become more competitive. And had an approach of a common market for the Eastern Africa region. Thank you very much. Let us then go to Dennis. In your view, what was the impact, or what has been the impact of this COVID on the hotel and in the hospitality industry? What are your take-home messages? 2, 3, 4 areas that you think, yes, if we do this as the East African community, we mitigate and move forward. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as brief as I can, but let me start with these 2 remarks. That number one, the advent of COVID-19 and the message it gave us. For me, it speaks to 2 things: the theory and the practice of integration. Because the theory and the practice of integration. Because what we saw throughout, from the time the region was hit by the pandemic in March, going forward, clearly, all of us realized that there's a disconnect between the theory and the practice of integration. We saw stoppages at borders. We saw all sorts of uncalled for barriers, and each country coming up with a different position. And despite the several meetings that we had many, by the way, discussing how can we open up this, how can we do this, how can we proceed with this jointly? Because the idea was, can we proceed jointly? And as Vimal points out, it pointed to the fact that we are disconnected as a region. We have so much in theory about it, but in practice, we still, I think, cling to our small, tiny interests and forgetting the wider picture and the major benefits we're getting from the wider integration. Then what it does to what it speaks to, therefore, it speaks to the it was a wake-up call in my view. It was a wake-up call to the politics, to the economics of the region that we need. It's about time we harmonize these things. Otherwise, who knows? There might be a third and fourth pandemic. It could come in a different form, like this one came. Nobody expected it, and it will affect us even further if we don't pick lessons from this one. So my message, the first one would be, this is a wake-up call. Let us understand as a region that this one came to wake us up, and if a second one came, what would we do? Would we still have 60 kilometers of trucks parking on a border side waiting for clearance? That is one. Number two, I think that in the hospitality, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry at large has been hit very badly. I happen to be one of the players in the industry. We have experienced 0 clients, for example, in the hotel industry. Take the examples of the major hotels for 1 year, 0 clients. And yet you have to maintain certain operating costs. The hotel has to remain connected on internet. The hotel has to be lit, it has to be light. The hotels have to have all the key facilities. Some few workers have to stay around to keep it clean, otherwise it will have a problem. Now, what do we do then? I think what this pandemic speaks to us, therefore, is we need, pretty much as we have done in Rwanda here, we need to go to government and say, please come to our relief. I know Kigali has done its part in that sector. I'm not sure what has been done in Uganda, in Kenya, and in Tanzania, but I think hoteliers across the region, we need a uniform relief package. Number one, to have moratoriums, longer period moratoriums with the banks. Rwanda has given up to say 5 years, because we need to be honest ourselves with what is the recovery period going to be. Sometimes I hear that some countries are giving 1 year moratorium. Believe me not, a hotel that has lost all entire business today and is on, if you take a Marriott is all half, 3/4 closed today. It is going to take it 2021, 2022, and probably recover in 23. Because you see, this is an industry that is made by people from out there. Our industry is so unique that it is not like agriculture where products grown here can make business for us. Our products are the people from out there, from Asia, from the West, from Europe, from where. So if those are not coming freely, we will be out of business for some time. And so therefore it calls for specific and heightened COVID measures out there, including vaccinations, including controls in Europe, in USA, in Asia. Now, look at what is happening in India. Look at the extreme. India has become the epicenter today of COVID. And yet, of our clients who are from India. So we're going to lose out on that market for quite. So we need the outside world to perform better in terms of COVID management so that we get back to market. But before that is done, we appreciate it will take time. We need government interventions here to keep us afloat. Loans should be suspended for quite some time. We should get incentives. That's the next point. I think we should, as an industry across the region, we need to qualify for automatic incentives, to qualify for certain the preferential tariffs. For example, in terms of power, hotels should be having a specific tariff for power, for the basic needs that we use to keep the hotels open. Because at some point, the hotels will open anyway, and we need to keep them moving. So we need government interventions with key incentives so that we can bring in items easily without specific taxes. And here I refer to specific import duties and specific for hoteliers and as well as manufacturers, because we pick things from manufacturers anyway. And I'm glad we discussed manufacturing. So once we have incentives in the manufacturing sector, as well as the hospitality in the sector, the linkage there is going to give us a positive impact, and we keep afloat while we wait for our businesses to pick again. Travel. travel restrictions have had very serious effects on us. How much have we done as a region to liberalize airspace? And we have said this over and over and over. My colleague Vimal knows how much we have done in this sector. Why don't we liberalize airspace so that we try as much as we can to fly free to all these destinations across the region? But currently what is happening is, I think there's focus on individual airline. And as I say, we are going to go continental. If we are not careful, the continental arrangements under CFTA are going to overtake our small regional arrangements. Who will benefit and who will lose? So I think it's time we speak to ourselves and open up the region so we can fly. And we don't want to have to fly people anyway. Some people can fly cargo. We all know the challenges available here, flying goods from here to West Africa. So we don't have to put all the aircrafts into flying people. And then we compete, and then we are struggling, and then we are looking for relief from governments. Some of the aircrafts can be turned into cargo planes. Some of the aircrafts can be turned into low-cost flights between our destinations, so that they operate more of volume than on. Somebody I think gave an example earlier of how easy it is to go to Dubai from Nairobi as compared to go to Dar es Salaam from Nairobi in terms of time, in terms of cost. Then the other thing is, of course, we need to ensure safety for us in the industry. Safety is number one, because we all learned from this pandemic that cleanliness was one of the key things that was required, or be dirty and spread the disease, or keep clean and avoid the disease. So we need to maintain a certain level of cleanliness. And I speak to this with a lot of authority, because I see how many tourists come to Kigali and the remarks they make about how clean it is, as if it is difficult to clean other cities. And yet cleanliness will be our survival in this thing. There's no reason whatsoever why European cities should be clean and our cities are dirty, and we tend to justify it and look at it as normal, like, oh, no, Kigali is clean. I'm sure moderator and my colleagues on the panel, you have all made these remarks of, oh, how clean is Kigali? Cleanliness is part of what we shall sell as a region. I do not see why, for any reason, for goodness sake, we don't all adopt. Let's have clean cities across the region, so that everybody looking at us is looking at that. Let me go to a cleaner region rather than go to a cleaner country, because we need a joined up tourism arrangement. In any case, currently we have a single tourism visa. So why would you be in a dirty city and then go to a cleaner city and then you pay the same fee? The last one is
just summarize, Kasera.
Yes. Yeah, I talked about the regional financial stimuli. Then somebody talked about, I think I said it earlier, mutual recognition of the certification of both COVID tests and vaccination. I think it's high time the regions spoke to each other so that vaccination is done across board. It is done aggressively. Rwanda has taken, I think, a major lead. A couple of us are vaccinated. The other countries, I think we should speak to them and we see a general vaccination plan. And when the next one will come, we speak the same language in this thing. Then lastly, my point would be, can we take this study forward and speak to policymakers? Can we engage ministers of the East African community? Can we engage ministers of trade? Can we engage members of the East African Parliament with this study? We complete it properly, we present it to them, we make follow-ups and make sure the things that have been discussed will have an impact in what we are doing. Otherwise, I know that different countries are doing different things on this same subject, but if we don't coordinate our work, all our efforts will be lost in paperwork. Thank you.
Thank you, Kasera. You have really illuminated a lot of points. First, you began with
Carrera, not Kasera.
Pardon?
I'm Carrera, not Kasera.
Let me call this. So thank you very much. It has been, you have really enriched the position. I want to believe that our consultants are picking up this so that they can see how they can infuse and, explode it more in the reports And as you say, at the end of the day, we really don't want these outputs to, to be there in a library or in an office. They should go out there and be implemented. So my call to all of us stakeholders, let us see how we push this into the organs of the EAC community for action. Thank you very much. Let me then invite the last panelist, and that is Mungure and Deoya. Please intervene and can we hear about the agriculture industry? If you want to be specific on horticulture, fine. 2-3 key points about the impact of COVID on this sector and what we can do. 2-3 policy options. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. This has been a very good session. I'll mainly focus on the horticulture industry because as TAHA, TAHA is the Tanzania Horticulture Association. We're based in Tanzania, in Arusha. And we conducted a study to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the horticultural industry of Tanzania from mid-April to mid-August. You'll pardon me, I won't be able to switch on my video because my network is not very stable. So what we discovered in our survey is more of the issues were covered in the presentation, but I can just give a key highlight. Number one, it was the global logistical system disruption. This was evident to our exports as the consultant who presented about the agricultural export highlighted. And 75% of the large farmers that we interviewed, the large farmers are the ones who are exporting mainly fresh flowers, avocados, French beans, and the likes in Tanzania. 75% of them said they face challenges in securing transportation to overseas market. And as Dennis previously talked about the importance of liberalization of the airlines, not only for passengers, but also for cargo. As Tanzania, we had a challenge in having the cargo flights because we normally use the passengers flights, and almost the industry was about to crumble in the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020 if it was not for us to secure the Ethiopian Airlines to ship our commodities. So up until now, we are depending mainly on the Ethiopian Airlines cargo plane. So I think it's high time that we liberalize the air so that we can have more cargo planes, which will be able to ship commodities and produce to the overseas market. But also something which hasn't been touched by the consultant in the presentation is about the percentages of post-harvest losses. Because if 75% of farmers had challenges in exporting their produce, probably some of the produce was sold in the local markets, or some of the produce, because these are perishables, was distorted or so. So I think it's important for the consultant to also look at the post-harvest loss percentages. We assessed that some avocado farmers in Njombe, which is in the Southern Highlands, very famous for producing the Hass avocados, which are being exported to the European countries and so forth. They had a loss of up to 76% in revenues because they projected they'll be getting some revenues based on the export price, but in turn they had to sell their commodities in the local market. And as we know, Hass avocado varieties for export. So they lost 76% of their projected incomes due to this. And I think what other thing that COVID has really showed us or has put into real test for EAC, I think it has put into test the integration aspect. There were not free movement of goods and people in the beginning. Many governments set some initial stages to try to contain the disease. People could not move freely and goods could not move freely. In Tanzania here, especially in the avocado industry, we really depend on traders from Kenya to come and buy these fruits and export them to the European markets and the USA markets. So many of them could not come in the months of April because of there was not free movement of people. Also, there was really delayed truck turnover time in the borders. So many traders did not come to Tanzania to purchase these commodities. So in turn, the farmers just had to sell it internally, and they lose a lot. But also, let's not only look at the negative impacts. Let's look at the positive impacts. As we have seen on a global scale, there's been changes in the consumer behavior patterns, where a lot of people were consuming a lot of horticultural commodities. This is evident in UK, the United Kingdoms, and in France. We did a marketing study to assess that, and we noted that during the pandemic time, people were consuming more horticultural commodities because they wanted to have a very diversified diet, which is more nutritional, so that their body immune could be able to fight with the virus. So as EAC, I know we are also in the process of setting up the fruits and vegetable strategy. I think it's high time to join hands and to see how we can access these export markets, because it's been a global trend even before COVID. The consumption of fruits and vegetables all around the globe has overtaken the consumption of cereals. So we are seeing a very positive trend here. So I think as EAC, it's high time to really focus, join hands and focus on this very big opportunity. Because even in the country, in Tanzania, people from Tanzania can relate. We've been consuming a lot of lemons, a lot of tea, the lemon tea grass, a lot of ginger during the time of the pandemic, just as we are trying to boost our immune and so forth. So this is a very huge market opportunity. And just to give you a highlight, the avocado fruit became very popular in the recent few years because the governments in the European countries have really promoted that fruit. So now we can see that even our own governments are promoting these horticultural commodities. So let's take on this. Another issue that we saw based on as an impact of COVID-19 was constrained cash flow. And this is obvious because people could not secure markets. For example, in Tanzania, in our exports, in our horticultural commodities exports, flowers are really contributing a huge chunk. And as you know, flowers are ornamental goods, and they are highly linked to disposable income. People will only purchase it if they have a high disposable income. And during such uncertain times, people were not using so much of their disposable income rather than saving it. So the flower industry was really hit hard, and most of the companies in the flower business had very huge financial or cash flow constraints. So I think it's high time for the government to incentivize the flower sector, not only in Tanzania but also in Kenya. I was reading some literatures. I know Kenya was struggling. The Kenya flower industry was struggling on this. So other issues which were impacted, obviously the inputs were impacted because they couldn't be free movement, which led to high prices. Most of the agricultural inputs imported in Tanzania are coming from Kenya, were being supplied by Kenya. So when there was not free movement of people and goods, it put a little bit of a dent, maybe 2 or 3 weeks delays in securing the inputs. And even a day or 2 days in agriculture, if a farmer fails to secure the input on time, that's already a very big dent. So let me go to the policy issues that we could focus on so as to quickly recover from this pandemic. I think number one, it could be focusing on providing additional liquidity to banks, so that the banks may work on restructuring and rescheduling of the loans. Most of the businesses which were hit hard were financed, and they are a little bit stuck because they had the very big constraint in their cash flows. So most of them couldn't repay on time. Most of them needed to secure some loan to keep their businesses afloat and so forth. So I think it's high time for the central banks to provide an additional liquidity to the commercial banks, so that it would be easy for them to do the loan restructuring and probably rescheduling. But also, it's very important to facilitate smooth movement of goods and people. I won't touch so much on this. All the previous panelists have really dived deep into this. But also, it's important to incentivize the flower farmers, because they've been really hit hard, and
they offer a lot of jobs. Yeah, so if you incentivize the flower farmers to keep their businesses afloat and to get back on track, that means you're also having a rippling effect on the employment industry. But also one last remark to the consultant who presented about the agriculture industry. There were some figures which were projected showing the trends of exports based on monthly basis for maize. I think in Tanzania, I wouldn't really pick those trends for 1 year just to compare the situation. I think I would take maybe 2 or 3 years back and then take the 2020 and try to compare it, because sometimes the volume of production or the volume of exports may be varying based on based on the either climatic conditions, because as you know, recently there've been a radical shift in the climate, so probably we would see different seasons as much as we expected in the past, but also it could be based on other aspects other than COVID-19. So to get a very clear comparison, I would suggest that the comparison should be done on an annual basis and not on just 1 year. I think that could give us a more broad picture, because COVID-19 couldn't be the only reason which influenced the rise and fall of the bars. Probably there are issues of price, there are issues of weather, and issues of availability of crops and so forth. So that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Ndewenya, for your intervention. One positive thing I heard was the increased consumption of horticultural products, and this is great. It's an opportunity. Of course, there are other propositions you have made. I want to believe the consultants have taken all your comments on board so that we see how they improve on the work. Thank you, members. Thank you, panelists. For me, really, it is, we have real-time constraints. I would have wished that we have another round, but because of time, allow me to hand over to Geoffrey so that he can decide whether he still wants to open the floor for any question and answer, and then we close. So, Geoffrey, please. Thank you very much, panelists and members. Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much for moderating this very important session, quite important. I probably, with permission from my chair, if my chair directs that we can have more 10 minutes, so be it. But if it suffices, then we can probably open 5 minutes for any Q&A or any comments to the panel, and we close. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Geoffrey, let's have about 5 minutes of questions, if there are any, or the hot comments that are out there that we didn't capture before we come to a closure. The floor is open.
Thank you, Chair. Any questions by show of hands or a comment in the chat room? Can I take that silence means there's none? And if there is none, then it's time to wrap up. And we apologize for really being this late, but this shows how people are enthusiastic to be in this panel and in this validation. And the contributions made are very, very pertinent and ensuring that the work that is being done by these consultants really represents the interests of the private sector in our region. We will share the reports as soon as they are complete and the inputs are incorporated, and we'll definitely share the presentations made today to all the participants requested for them and those that we were on our invite. So otherwise, I leave it to the chairs, the chair, the vice chairperson. Please, you can do your closing remarks and a vote of thanks. And in that order, Mark will also do the closing remarks. on behalf of ARC. Thank you very much, dear participants and dear panelists, for this, for making time to this. Thank you very much. Chair, please welcome.
Okay. Hello. Hello, are we together or I'm lost?
Yes, hello, we are getting you.
Right. Okay. Let me take this opportunity to thank everyone, my comrades, my old colleagues, my friends, and the consultants, the team. Thank you very much for the discussions. Thank you for your time. The one thing I always remark about our community, the East African community is never short of ideas or documents to improve our situation. Never. We have all the good documents, we have all the good ideas here. We are only quite wanting on implementation. So one of the recommendations of the consultant, of the working group, should be that East Africa has a challenge normally of implementing decisions. We have so many decisions, by the way, to improve our situation. Before, during, and after the pandemic, there will be. But we never implement. We are good at drafting. We have such good documents, but we don't follow them. One of the key documents we have, for example, is a study financed by DFID on liberalization of airspace, done very well to show the cost-benefit of analysis of opening up space and what advantages it has for us. We have never implemented. It is in the cupboards of Arusha. In every city, we have deposited a copy. So that should be one of the recommendations of this one. Number two is that let's take this study forward. I find it very interesting, very personally, very, very interesting. Let's take it forward. I think let's look for small monies here and there, small or medium monies, to enable you, the consulting group, to take this study further, include the recommendations I've done, and I think be prepared, in my view, to go across the cities of the region. I think we'll be happy to invite you to speak directly to policymakers. Possibly there we will hope that the message is sinking in deeper. And lastly, on our part, as EABC, we shall definitely do what we can. As soon as you finish this by next week, we are happy to take this to the East African Community Secretariat. Very fortunately, it's our own now in office. I'm sure Honorable Peter Matuki will take up these recommendations as part of his initial activities in office. We'll take it, we'll ask that the study be taken to IALA, the parliament of the region, as soon as possible. So on the part of EABC and on behalf of EABC, we will do whatever it takes to make sure there's usefulness in this study. It doesn't become another document for ourselves. I thank you very much. I wish you a good day.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And I think you have actually responded to a question that had come through from one Duncan Ondu, who was, is there any action plan to take forward recommendations? And I think, Chairman, you have rightly answered that question. Thank you very much for that.
Okay.
So please, over to you.
Geoffrey, is that me?
Yes, over to you, Mark, please, for your vote of thanks and closing remarks.
Coming clearly, thank you. Members, we are happy as ARC to have this validation workshop. We are happy to hear a lot of suggestions. Consultants, please do the best possible and have these suggestions incorporated. And then, just as the chair said, we are committed to, getting out there so that we have our policy people, implementing some of these propositions. With that, then, let me invite you to the Regional Policy Forum, which we have scheduled for 25th and 26th. We will be having all the reports, not only from the EABC and the related sectors. We shall have many more from the other 4 technical working groups, which we will summarize and, get the filtered, policy options, given to all the stakeholders. So you are invited for that. Apart from that, let me just say thank you very much, and let us meet then. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, thank you very much for the closing remarks, and we'll definitely attend the regional meeting. On behalf of the Eabc Secretariat, thank you very much for dear participants. Thank you very much, my panelists, my esteemed panelists. Thank you to my staff members at Eabc, and to my team at ARC who have worked together on this. Of course, we still have a lot to do going forward, and we hope to get the best out of this assignment as planned. Otherwise, let me wish you a very good afternoon, and keep yourself safe from this COVID pandemic. God bless you. Bye-bye. Santeni.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good day.